Welcome, this is Chemistry Realignment, and you are on Sankofa's time. Peace to the gods. Cannibalism in the transatlantic context. Consumption under the new slavery. The Charmy sadly frequently transport slaves from Africa to the Caribbean. As a result, Equiano spends a significant amount of time in Barbados, Montserrat, and other parts of the Caribbean observing overseers, whom he describes as human butchers, practicing their cruel trade. One of the first narrated examples of this cruelty is a Negro man staked to the ground and cut. Most shockingly, his crime involved being connected with a white woman who was a common prostitute. While staked to the ground, the overseer bit by bit cut off pieces of each of his ears, prolonging what was already a horrific and unbearable punishment. It was common practice in the Caribbean to not only cut off the ears of slaves, but to also broil them and make the slaves eat the broiled pieces as punishment. Anglican missionary John Wesley documented this phenomenon in his Thoughts Upon Slavery. He writes, "After they are whipped till they are raw all over, some put pepper and salt upon them, and some drop melted wax upon their skin. Others cut off their ears and constrain them to broil and eat them. In this way, the slave was made an accomplice to his or her own social consumption." Such acts of auto-cannibalism, self-consumption, reinforced for the slave the interrelations among punishment. It was common practice in the Caribbean to not only cut off the ears of slaves, but to also broil them and make the slaves eat the broiled pieces as a punishment. Anglican missionary John Wesley documented this phenomenon in his Thoughts Upon Slavery. He writes, "After they are whipped till they are raw all over, some put pepper and salt upon them. Some drop melted wax upon their skin. Others cut off their ears and constrain them to broil and eat them. In this way, the slave was made an accomplice to his or her own social consumption." Such acts of auto-cannibalism, self-consumption, reinforced for the slave the interrelations among punishment. Slavery as the slow and incremental death to body and soul, and the general culture of slave seasoning as a process meant to prepare the slave for all manner of consumption. In the 1700s, John Atkins, a surgeon in the British Royal Navy, recorded an insurrection that occurred aboard a slave ship. The captain and crew quelled the insurrection and, as punishment, made the captured African persons eat human body parts before murdering them. 3 others, abettors, but not actors, nor of strength for it, he sentenced to cruel deaths, making them first to eat the hearts and liver of one of them killed. The correlation in this example between execution and death by consumption is noteworthy. Rosalind Shaw observed that among conflicting cultural groups in the colonial era, such acts of auto-cannibalism reinforced the militarized and legislative authority of a dominant group. Not only do we consume you, the captain of the British Royal Navy conveys, but we also make you consume each other. These incidents of auto-cannibalism punctuated a more subtle and pervasive reality of starvation and self-consumption. Within this new Caribbean context of slavery, masters frequently employ tactics of starvation, which range from the incremental loss of food to more blatant and debilitating forms of hunger. Early on, Equiano makes note of his master feeding a group of slaves, well, instead of starving them as their own master frequently does. My master often gave the owners of these slaves 2.5 of these pieces per day because he thought their owners did not feed them well enough according to their work that they did. Starvation is so endemic to slave culture that when Equiano's master rents the Igbo man out on jobs, he has to pay a white man to accompany him. The sole responsibility of this white man, whom he pays from 6 to 10 pestarins a day, is to make sure that those who rent Equiano feed him each day. Once Equiano recalls, for a few days, I was let out to fit a vessel and had no victuals allowed me by either party. Equiano was made to literally starve for several days. Slaves treated thusly had less of a will to disobey and resist. Starvation ensured control and set the stage for the master to enact even more heinous forms of social consumption, though not necessarily made to consume his or her own boiled flesh. The emaciated slave still embodied a condition of daily and incremental self-consumption. In commercial terms, the slave's emaciated body translated into the blood and flesh currencies of social stature, increased wealth, and spiritual dominion for the master. Quite literally, the master held within his hands the powers of life and death. And another example from Equiano's Caribbean observances, the taking or harvesting of flesh is a regular occurrence. A particular nameless master has a reputation for cruel punishments. He had not a slave, but what had been cut and had pieces fairly taken out of the flesh. The idea of a human butcher seems to apply expressly to this individual. Equiano does not go into detail about what is done with the flesh carved out of individuals that he leaves to the imagination. In the context of such occurrences, white men experience a sense of deific power. Furthermore, Equiano makes a point of emphasizing that the master takes pleasure in this and other torturous activities to which he has clearly given much thought. It is easy to apprehend how much events conditioned and made humans into slaves. However, less ascertainable is the fount of meanings embedded in the master's pleasure taking. The choice of the word pleasure rather than satisfaction or purpose, for example, cues the reader to the fact that this is an interchange of power, erotic energy, and soul. Following such brutal treatment, Equiano observed that many masters would make slaves go on their knees and thank their owners and pray, or rather say, God bless them. Plantation masters frequently cited Old Testament biblical references to devotees blindly serving their master, but this scenario, which draws upon biblical tenets, goes beyond simplified notions of morality. The typical roles of master and slave and the master/slave relation